Well, good morning. Another Monday is here. And we're going to dig into some more tips and pointers and see what we can share here. I don't think we're going to be here all that long, but here we go. Once there was an explorer that came into the write-up area. And sometimes the service riders, there were 4 of those guys out there, and we ran 100 cars a day through the shop, and so they'd call me out there sometimes just to talk to a customer. And I would say, all right, what kind of deal are you having? He said, well, sometimes without warning I'll get pinging, spark knock and stuff, and then other times I'll drive, I don't have it at all. It seems to happen without warning, but when I switch the car off and restart it, it seems to go away if I catch it doing that. And so just listening to him and thinking about it, and this is just wacky as all get out, where you just happen to think about the right thing. So I went out there and opened his hood, and I pulled the air cleaner, and laying on top of the air filter, in between the air filter and the screen, there was one wing of a cockroach. Just the wing laying there. And this little hole right here behind that screen is where the airflow is measured with those 2 hot wires. And I postulated, without really being able to be sure, there's nothing supposed to be flopping around in there. And I says, if that roach's wing ever lands right here in this spot on this screen where it deflects airflow, if it lands there the right way particularly, around this so that you're getting plenty of air in the engine but it's not reporting at all, then you're going to have lean condition, which makes pinging and spark knock because lean is hot in a combustion situation. So I said, let's get this roach wing out of here and let's see if that does any good. Now, granted, we didn't have to write a ticket or charge him any money for it, but it was just kind of fun to do that. And he came back later and said, that totally took care of my problem. You don't know how much I appreciated this, But sometimes a problem like that, if somebody doesn't think about it, you could see that roach wing laying there and not think anything about it, dump it out, put it back together, and you never knew what you did to fix it. And I've had that too with me. But in that particular case, I managed to do something right, Now you kind of pat yourself on the back a little bit.
It's spinning.
All right, now we've got a Honda that we suspected it might have a bad radiator coolant fan. She said it was running a little warm when she stopped. And so what we did is we found the radiator coolant fan relay, which is going to be that one right there that's got a picture of the radiator. Don't get confused by these two. All right. And then the 2 copper terminals right here are the load carrying terminals. And so what we did first was we found the hot one right here. And then we went to the other one, went to the other copper terminal, and we found out that that one there was showing no ground at all. See, we notice hook this to hot. All right, and we're gonna spin that fan, and every now and then, see, that light will come on when we're turning the fan through. Look down here at me turning the fan. See, when we're turning the fan, sometimes we have a light and sometimes we don't. What that means is she's got a bad condenser. It's not a condenser fan, it's working. A radiator coolant fan. And so we determined with minimal effort that this has a bad radiator coolant fan. So we're gonna see if I can get her cooling fan to put on here. I don't know how many times I've talked about this on here, but that's an actual demonstration of troubleshooting a bad fan, when somebody was talking about it overheating it, drive-throughs and traffic lights and all that kind of thing. And when I first ran into that when I was at the Ford place, when I was working on a Tempo, and they said, the pop-off on the air compressor the air conditioner compressor would just spray refrigerant into the air because it was getting high head pressure and all, and it wouldn't do it when in the shop. And I got to thinking about that, and I said, if there's one bad commutator segment on this fan and it happens to stop on that one like Russian roulette, or like roulette, not Russian roulette, this thing will not run even if it gets power. And so I says, well, I'm going to check the continuity. And so I decided I was going to hook my test light in series with the fan, the hot side to the trigger going out to the fan, and when I turned the fan through, it would go out periodically, the light would. And that told me that fan was bad. That is a one-shot, one-and-done test. When you see that, you're finished about, the fan motor's got to be replaced. There may be other problems, but that fan motor's got to be replaced one way or another. This was really one of the really bad ones where it only had one good commutator segment and a whole bunch of bad ones. And I've seen that over and over and over again on various different vehicles. The crazy part, if it's only got one or two bad commutators, it may stop on those only when it's not in the shop. So you'll say, well, I can't find anything wrong with it. They go down the road, they stop at their favorite stop sign, it does it again, they come back, hey, it did it again, and you may run it in the shop for half a day and never see it do it. This right here puts all of that to rest as far as, is it a bad fan motor? And so that's one of the best tests that I ever fabricated. I don't know if anybody, I've never known of anybody doing this unless I taught them to do it, and I taught a bunch of my students to do it at the college. I believe what we got here is a cracked flywheel. As the closer you get to it, the louder it gets in that flywheel there. And I've heard flywheels go tick, 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 tick like that before. It's also making a sort of a funky sound like that one that you just heard. And I think we're going to first, before we do anything else, go in there where the flywheel is and see what we can find on that. It also seems to exacerbate the noise when you're starting it. Kind of like that's the way, like the flywheel is having a lot more stress on it when it's starting. That's a PT Cruiser, as I remember, and we wound up having to jerk the axle out and put a flywheel in it. It's not really too hard on that one, but we saw quite a few cracked flywheels whenever I was working in it. They'd hear a ticking noise, and in worst case scenarios, they'd keep driving the stupid thing until the flywheel got to where it would just spin and spin and spin, and it wouldn't spin the engine when you tried to start it. See that we're monitoring that spark while it was running, because periodically it would just cut off like that, and what we determined was the ignition module was faulty on that one. And basically what we want to do is we want to watch it happen. And I also talked on a previous one about using you can hook a timing light to one of the plug wires and have, tape the trigger or tie wrap it shut, or so that it's flashing the light all the time. Or if it's one of those lights that doesn't have a trigger, some of them are like that, the cheaper ones, whatever. And you can watch that, and if the light quits flashing just as the engine stalls like that, did you notice it wasn't like you switched the key off, it would miss a few hits, and then it would kill the engine. And so we found a faulty ignition module on that one like that. This old pickup truck here, some of my best students drove raggedy old trucks like this one right here. And that picture, that is a classic old, I think that's a 64 or 63 Chevy truck. Those trucks were all over the place when I was a boy growing up. And look at this goofy guy put 4x4 up here. And you know good and doggone well that ain't no 4x4, but it's just a cool old truck, and exhaust coming out right in front of the of the wheel. But some of these guys really could have some cool rides. This right here is really common on Explorers. Of course, this one right here is leaking between the hose and the thermostat housing. But these housings on these 4-liter Explorers, like the one I drive, like to crack. I found a metal one from partsgeek.com that I put on mine to do away with this plastic nonsense. And I really like that one. It's chrome-plated pewter, basically, is what it is. I've actually put. Seemed like I put that on an article too a while back. But one way or another, this right here is a cool little picture of that. I took that picture. So you see that chalky white stuff, that's dried coolant. That's what it is, where it's been seeping. We did on one of the college vans. This guy that one of the college employees drove this van, and he was complaining about the headliner falling. And a few years before this, the headliner was falling on my Jeep Cherokee, and I had the upholstery instructor come over there and show us. We took the headliner board out and laid it in there in the electronics lab on a table. And she showed us how to use 8088 3M glue and all this. You got to take this, you got to pull the headliner out. If you got to know how to do that, and then you peel all of this old stuff off, and then you use a wire brush to get all the foamy stuff off, and then you got to take the new headliner fabric, got to be big enough to cover the whole thing without any seams, and let it, and then you're going to basically lay it over here, fold it back, put a bunch of this 8088 stuff, and then use the back of your hand to smooth that out and get all of the get it stuck to the board good. Then you fold the other side forward and do that anyway. And she was talking about just putting a little X cut everywhere there was a hole, but I always like to cut it exactly to fit because it made it easier to find the screw holes and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, it's not that difficult to put a headliner in there, but you got to have the time and the desire to want to do it. My headliner on my Explorer was falling. This one turned out really good. We even put a darker color in there and it looked a lot better when we got through, but it cost about $90 for the stuff, and we did it. You know, and a lot of those places that charge you a whole lot more money than that. I think I paid $350 to have a headliner replaced in my Explorer because I had the money and I didn't want to fool with doing it in the driveway, okay? But anyway, this was the one that we did, and this is my shop at the college and all that stuff. This was one of those wacky situations where we ordered a blower controller for a Chevy pickup from the parts store, and they sent one that was supposed to work. Now you might even notice, see the way it's configured? We absolutely could not get this thing to go in there and work. This was angled wrong. Notice these little angle things. There was just all kinds of issues with this. It wouldn't mount right. Of course, it had that built-in relay for your high blow and all that. But it was listed in the Advanced Auto Parts catalog to fit this truck, but it absolutely would not fit the truck. So we wound up. It seems to me like we had to get one from the dealership or something. Now that may not be the same problem anybody's having nowadays, but that one there was a no-go. It just absolutely, there was no way you could cram that in there and make it fit. This was a funny situation where one of my students was using a 3/8 air ratchet to put a water pump on a Trailblazer, and that little 6mm bolt just popped off up in the hole. And you know, these give trouble for other reasons, but he actually did this with an air ratchet. And so I give him a drill bit. I said, take this drill bit, you know, we center punch that, take a drill bit, you're going to drill it up in there, and then you're going to run you an easy out up in there, you know, go up one size with the hole. And he kept trying to drill the thing, and he couldn't, it wouldn't just drill like hot butter. And so he says, no, that's not a good drill bit. This is not going to work. You know, we took the radiator out, the grill off and everything, where you could sit down and drill straight in there. I mean, it wasn't that difficult to get to once you get all that stuff out of the way. And so we're using an electric drill. An air drill for this is not usually a good idea because you lose control of the speed. You spin the drill bit too fast while you're drilling, you start to heat the bolt up, and it takes the temper out of the drill bit and it tempers the bolt, so you can't cut nothing. So it's a whole lot better off to use a real sharp drill bit, apply steady pressure, and just spin it slow while you're pushing real steady. Now, you know, if you push a little crooked, you're going to pop the drill bit off, you know, break it off, and that happens too. But anyway, there was another guy that was there, and he says, I can't get this to work either. You got a crappy drill bit here. This ain't going to work. So I used the same drill bit after both of those guys left for the day to go to their afternoon jobs. And I just steadily pushed on that old plug-in-the-wall Makita drill, real careful. Now you can use a battery drill for this, but you got to have really good control over the speed of the drill. And what happened was I wound up managing to get the thing out of there with an easy out. I drilled it. I took a picture of this other guy drilling it. That's not my hand. That's one of the guys that gave up on it. And so I drilled it, brought it out of there, and I texted this picture to both of those guys, and they claimed I used a different drill bit and I cheated and I didn't treat them fairly and all that kind of stuff. That was kind of funny, but that's how that's supposed to be done anyway. Now this right here was an engineered fix I did on a 72 LTD when I married my first wife. She had a 72 LTD. Looked just like this, under the hood, same kind. And one day I noticed that the alternator belt was squealing, and this bolt that goes into that head right there had broke off up in there. And the bolt, the shaft of the bolt was still there, but it was popped off smooth with the head. And I said, well, I could probably drill that out the way that I did the other thing, but because this was my car and I was working under my carport, and this was when I lived down in Texas, you know, and this was, I won't say this was 1981 when I did this. I said, I'm going to engineer a fix for this doggone thing, because I had a drill press and an air compressor and all kinds of stuff set up at that house. It was on 3924 Lakeshore Drive, Port Arthur, Texas. You can look that up. on the map and see where I used to live. There was a carriage house behind the place, and I had my air compressor out there, and the air was piped underneath the ground to the shop. So I didn't even have to listen to the air compressor, but I had good air and all that. That's a long story. But anyway, this is what I did with that. I got a piece of metal, 1/4 inch steel, and actually this is I bent it, perfectly 90 degrees, drilled a hole, intake manifold, bolt went through that thing, got a longer bolt put in there, drilled a hole here. This broke off piece of bolt stayed up in there, and I had a little space in between here. I cut, and I drilled a hole in that bolt so that this would support the back of that alternator bolt. So when you looked at that alternator bolt, you couldn't tell that this was back here, but when I put that cotter key in there, it wasn't going anywhere. And that was an engineered fix that I did that worked really well on that old car, and it was still like that whenever I sold the car later on. Now these are some spark plugs, like you see, that's got the dual electrodes and all. That on a Toyota, as I remember, that was an interesting picture of those, the way they were wearing out, and some of these I have actually seen some of the suppliers will have spark plugs will have 2 electrodes like this that are aftermarket plugs, and they'll sell these wires that's got 2 cores in the wire. The craziest thing I ever seen. But anyway, this one here is factory stuff. These are Denso plugs here. This one here shows rich. Whenever you see this soot, that particular cylinder is getting way too much fuel. Something's wrong there. Typically you'll have some kind of if all of the plugs look like this, then you're going to have some sort of a map sensor issue, or some fuel that's not commanded going in there. Like if it's going in from somewhere else other than the like for example the diaphragm on the fuel pressure regulator ruptures. Usually that'll be enough fuel to make it look wet and sooty. But this one right here was that cylinder was running right to. If it's just one cylinder, it's typically going to be an issue with the injector or something like that, But that's a sooty plug. Sometimes you'll see these plugs like this. You'll have them all that way because somebody has driven it too many times cold without letting it warm up, and that happens too. And I've actually, back whenever cars still had carburetors on them, somebody called saying my car won't start. I'd pull it out. The plugs were all fouled. They didn't drive it enough. The choke never got completely opened up, and they just, or the choke was malfunctioning and it wouldn't open. There'd be stuff like that. But that's carburetor stuff and fuel injection stuff. You're gonna have injectors, or the evap system can have a saturated canister for people packing the gas tank, and it can cause extra fuel to go in there, but it won't usually soot it up like this quite so bad. It usually just, on newer cars, it will start purging when it's sitting there idling. It'll just cause it to almost die and then surge ahead, This is a bridged spark plug. That one there is in pretty bad shape. It almost looks like it's gapped too close. Got valve stem seal deposits on it. Eventually it got like this. Occasionally on a lawnmower or on any other kind of car, you'll see a little bitty something stuck in between the ground and the center electrode. It looks like the compression would blow it out of there, but for some reason it doesn't, and it'll be conductive so that you don't see a naked spark in there to light off the mix. It'll misfire on that cylinder. My neighbor lady's lawnmower did that. I went over to look at a lawnmower, and one time I went over there and their lawnmower wouldn't start, and I said, well, I got a little gas on a rag and stuck it up in the carburetor, and it fired up on that. And I said, well, you got carburetor issues. And so I put a little $30 carburetor on it because some of the O-rings were coming apart on the inside. And about 2 weeks later, she said, now it won't start again. I went over, and that time I wasn't the carburetor. I pulled the spark plug out, and it was a neat looking little spark plug, but it was bridged, and I just broke that little thing out that was in between there, but it didn't look nearly as bad. This was on a vehicle that had a misfire, and it had bridged its gap there. This right here caused misfire on these coil near plug Chevys. That was one on one of our trainer truck where the students plugged the thing back in and bent the tang, and say, hey, this is a misfire and I don't know why. Well, sometimes you can just look and see what went wrong, and bend it back out and fix it. If it's bent or broke, you have to replace the part. This right here was a wireless vehicle interface from Ease Diagnostics back when they existed. I used to love to put the numbers on a big screen like this. And on this Chevrolet pickup we were working on, it was misfiring, and this would show us the number of misfires. See, this was cylinder 4, that was cylinder 6. And this would, you could put anything on this screen you wanted to. I like to put the engine coolant temperature on it when I was warming one up when we were doing a vehicle inspection, because all you had to do is just glance over that screen, and you plug that thing in, and it would interface with the computer, wirelessly. It was real slick and real handy. Ease Diagnostics. Some of you guys may remember that. I think they're gone now. Well, what I had done on that particular one that I was getting that, I did injector flow tests on this thing. We're using this little $100 box you can buy online, and it'll either put a half a second, 50 milliseconds, or 500 milliseconds. It's always, in other words, it's going to go, or 50 pulses or 500 pulses, but it's always a half a second. So what you do is you pressure up the fuel system, you tap this button, and you see how much that fuel pressure drops, and you record that for each injector, and that way if any of them doesn't drop the fuel pressure as much, then you'll know that that injector is partially clogged. And so that's a handy little tool right there. If I was working on cars every day, I'd have one of those right there right now. That one actually belonged to the college, so I didn't bring that one. But anyway, it turned out that vehicle had been setting up, and it had varnish in the fuel system, and some of the fuel injectors weren't flowing fuel the way they should, but the one that was misfiring the worst was cylinder number 6, which is what I showed on there. Now this particular 99 GMC, it was that was mid-model year. They changed to this new body style on these, and this one had been donated by GM to and this car here had been donated by GM too, and it had been donated to a school, and the school gave it to me. Had this thing up here, it said GM don't license, title, drive, or sell. Everybody loved this pickup. A lot of people wanted it because it was a lot newer when I got it. But I kept telling them, even if you got it, you wouldn't be able to put a tag on it because it's got a branded title. General Motors branded the title, and they don't want this thing driven on the road. Whenever a vehicle like that's donated to a school, they don't want you putting any parts of that vehicle on anything that's going to be driven on the road. And if you're getting it directly from the manufacturer, you got to sign paper saying that you won't do that. And there was a Hyundai that was donated to me by the Hyundai plant in Montgomery, and I went up there to get it, brought it back on a trailer. They said never to be driven on the road, and they says when you're through with this thing, you have to go and watch them crush it at the salvage yard. I actually signed a paper that said I would do that. They don't want no part of that on the road. They don't want the engine pulled out and put in another car, or the differential, the rear axle, or any of that stuff. And so, but anyway, this is another car that came from the same place that one did. This is a 97, this is a 99. This was way back in the early 2000s when these trucks were fairly new and all, your vehicles were, This right here is the prime terminal, and I got this pictured here. See that and this? See where it says prime? All right, if you nothing else goes in there, you can actually power that up to prime the fuel system if you want to, or you can check the fuel pump that way by hooking your test light between the positive battery terminal and put it in here. That ought to light the light. Now this is on a truck that's roughly the same vintage as the one I just showed you in that previous picture, plus several year models after that. But this is the fuel pump relay right here, and this is the prime. Now this is for the power. These two right here are the ones that go together when 85 and 86 are the coil, 30 and 87 are the two terminals that latch together whenever you power and ground these two. But anyway, I would take this and I'd stick just drop my test light into that hole real gently, and of course even if you spread the pin, it didn't matter a lot because nothing ever was supposed to go in there. It was a test or a prime terminal, and I'd test the fuel pump. Drop that test light in there. If it lights up, and you know that the fuel pump's okay as far as electrically, but if it didn't light up, you go back there and kick the gas tank, and if it comes on, you're going to need a fuel pump. Pretty simple. And that was something that I always taught too. If you know which one of these terminals to go to, and you don't have a prime terminal on yours, and you don't have a fuel pump control module in between the relay and the pump, you can actually do this test on just about any vehicle. You could also measure the current if you went to either put your little DVOM on amps and go from the positive battery terminal into this terminal right here with the key switched off even, and measure how many amps the pump is pulling. About 1.5 amps means that it's out of gas. If it's pulling anywhere between 4 to 8 amps, that means that it's pumping gas, you know. But that was another test that we would do. If the gas gauge is reading a half a tank, but you don't have any fuel pressure, and the fuel pump's running, if you measure the current that the fuel pump's running, either at the relay terminal, you know, if you unplug the relay and you find the one that's hot on these GM style relays, the one that's hot, which would be pin 30 and 87 are going to be the load carrying terminals. And find the one that's hot, that's the load carrying terminal, and find the one that's not hot. Make sure you're not on one of the coil pins, and then, you know, you can actually check the fuel pump the same way there. Watch this. That right there is a fuel pressure damper on a lot of these Asian cars, Hondas, Toyotas, and stuff like that. If you see that screw move when you switch on the key, that's telling you you've got 40 pounds of fuel pressure. You can just look at that and tell if you've got pressure. Now, if you've got water in there or something like that, this ain't going to tell you about that. But I went to the Toyota place one day and I was talking to some of the Toyota mechanics. I said, hey, did you know about this? Because I saw it. And they said, what? No, I didn't know about that. Nobody ever showed me that. Lexus, Toyota, some of your Hondas, this kind of thing will have these. Sometimes they'll have a plastic cap over this so you can't see this unless you pop the plastic cap off. But that little screw, when it moves, if it's dark in there and you can't see good, you can put your finger on it until somebody switch on the key, and if that screw moves, you got fuel pressure. That's a neat little trick that you see. You don't even have to go to the trouble to hook up a gauge and all that kind of stuff. Well, there's some of the guys pushing a car into the shop, and I'll be talking to you guys next week. We've been here 27 minutes nearly, and I hope you lasted till the end. We'll see you next week.